You've been gone for 3 hours, you walk through the front door, and your baby, who your babysitter swore was perfectly fine, laughing, playing, completely content, takes one look at your face and absolutely falls apart. Full collapse, screaming, reaching for you with trembling arms like they've survived something unsurvivable, and your first instinct, the very human instinct, is guilt. You think, I broke them by leaving. I've done something wrong. Maybe they're angry at me. Maybe they don't feel safe anymore. You are wrong. And the truth of what's actually happening in that moment is so much more extraordinary than you've been led to believe. Most parents carry this quiet, devastating assumption that a baby who cries upon seeing them has been traumatized by the separation, that the tears are proof of damage. Child-rearing folklore is full of this interpretation, that a baby who falls apart for mom is a baby who has been made anxious, insecure, maybe even emotionally fragile. Parenting forums amplify this fear until it becomes a kind of low-grade dread that follows working parents everywhere. But developmental psychology has been sitting on the real answer for decades, and it is not a story about damage. It is a story about the most sophisticated emotional intelligence system ever built into a living organism. Here is what is actually happening inside your baby's brain the moment you walk through that door. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, studying infant stress physiology, discovered something that permanently altered the field's understanding of infant emotional regulation. When you are absent, your baby does not simply wait for you in a state of calm suspension. Their nervous system registers your absence as a form of low-grade threat. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, begins to climb. But here is the part that no one tells you at the pediatrician's office. Your baby actively suppresses that distress response when they are with anyone other than you. Not because they are happy, because there is no point in expressing it. The one person who can actually answer that distress signal isn't there. So the body does what it has evolved over millennia to do. It holds, it waits, it contains. This mechanism has a name in attachment neuroscience. It's called stress inoculation through proximity regulation, and it was mapped with startling precision by Dr. Gunnar at the University of Minnesota's Institute of Child Development, whose decades of research into infant cortisol levels revealed something that should make every parent stop and breathe slowly. Babies with secure attachments show higher cortisol spikes in the presence of their primary caregiver after separation, not lower. The security of your presence doesn't eliminate the stress that accumulated in your absence. It licenses your baby to finally feel it. That cry when you walk through the door is not grief. It is a relief so overwhelming that the body cannot contain it any longer. To understand why this matters on a neurological level, you have to understand what your baby's brain is doing during those 3 hours you were gone. The limbic system, the brain's emotional processing core, has been operating in a kind of compressed emergency mode. The amygdala, which functions as the brain's threat detection center, has been quietly elevated, scanning, and monitoring. But the prefrontal cortex in an infant is barely online. It won't reach anything resembling functional maturity until the mid-20s, which means your baby has no internal mechanism for talking themselves down, for rationalizing the discomfort, for using language to reframe the experience. What they have instead of all of that is you. You are the external prefrontal cortex. You are the co-regulation system that their brain was literally designed by evolution to outsource its emotional processing to. This is the concept that researchers at Harvard's Center on the Developing Child have spent years trying to bring into mainstream awareness. They call it serve and return interaction, the neurobiological back and forth between caregiver and infant that quite literally shapes the architecture of the developing brain. Every time a baby reaches, vocalizes, or expresses distress, and you respond, every single time, you are reinforcing neural pathways in their prefrontal cortex that will eventually allow them to manage their own emotions independently. The cascade of tears when you return isn't a malfunction. It is your baby's nervous system rebooting, offloading accumulated stress data to the one processor powerful enough to handle it, your presence. And the neuroscience goes even deeper than this. There's a phenomenon called cardiac coherence coupling that most people have never heard of, But that changes everything about how you understand the parent-child bond. Researchers measuring heart rate variability in infants and their primary caregivers found that when a securely attached baby is reunited with their caregiver, their heart rate variability, a marker of nervous system regulation, begins to synchronize with the caregivers, not metaphorically, literally, the same pattern, the same rhythm. Two separate cardiovascular systems fall into biological harmony. Your heartbeat regulates your baby's heartbeat. Your nervous system teaches theirs how to find equilibrium. When you walk into the room, their body reaches for yours the way a compass needle reaches for north. Not because it is broken, but because it is functioning exactly as designed. Now consider what this means about the relationship between attachment security and emotional resilience later in life. Longitudinal studies conducted at the University of Minnesota followed children from infancy through young adulthood, tracking their attachment classifications as infants against their psychological outcomes decades later. The finding was unambiguous. Children with secure early attachments, the ones who cried the hardest when reunited, who sought their caregiver most urgently, who collapsed most completely into that relief, showed greater emotional regulation in adolescence, stronger relationships in adulthood, higher resilience under stress, and lower rates of anxiety disorders. The intensity of the reunion cry was not a warning sign. It was a signal of the depth of the bond. A bond that was, in the most literal neurological sense, building the foundation of a mind. Here is the part that should settle into your chest and stay there. When your baby reaches for you through their tears, arms trembling, face crumpled with the effort of having waited, they are not performing. They are not manipulating you. They are doing the most honest thing a human being can do. They are showing you, without the interference of language or social conditioning, exactly how much they needed you. And in that moment, your response matters more than almost anything else you will ever do as a parent. Because the way you receive that distress, whether you reach back, whether you hold without rushing, whether you let the storm happen without pulling away, becomes the template their nervous system uses to understand whether distress is survivable, whether need is shameful, whether the world responds when they fall apart. You are not just comforting your baby in that moment. You are writing the foundational code for how they will relate to vulnerability for the rest of their life. There is a version of this, though, that warrants quiet attention rather than alarm. Most babies navigate separation and reunion with this pattern: distress held, then released, and it resolves relatively quickly once the caregiver is present and responsive. But if your baby consistently shows no response upon your return, if there is no reach, no cry, no visible signal of the reunion registering at all, that flatness can sometimes reflect something developmental psychologists call avoidant attachment. A pattern where the baby has learned, through repeated experience, that expressing need produces no reliable response. This is not a verdict on any parent. It is information. And in the first 2 years of life, when neural plasticity is at its absolute peak, information always means there is still time to shift the pattern. A conversation with your pediatric developmental specialist is the right next step, not panic, but presence. The same presence that was always the answer. Somewhere right now, a baby is dissolving into tears the moment their parent walks through the door. And somewhere, a parent is feeling the familiar weight of guilt, the quiet fear that they've caused something irreparable by simply living their life, by having to leave. But the science says something completely different. Science says that the intensity of that cry is the precise measure of the security of that bond. It says that a baby who falls apart for you has learned, deep in the circuitry of their developing brain, that you are the place where falling apart is safe. And that is not a failure of attachment. That is attachment working exactly the way evolution spent hundreds of thousands of years designing it to work. Your baby doesn't cry when they see you because you broke something. They cry because you are the only one in their world capable of putting them back together. And somewhere beneath the noise and the exhaustion and the guilt, that is one of the most extraordinary things another human being will ever say to you, without a single word. If this reframes something you've been carrying, subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me the moment your baby's reunion cry finally made sense to you, because the next video explores something even stranger, why babies go completely still and silent around certain people, and what neuroscience says is actually happening in that moment of uncanny quiet.